Welcome back to another Therapy Insights episode. This week, we're talking about the hidden reality of emotional abuse. And these episodes are brought to you by questions that you guys have texted into the show about your specific circumstances. So if you have one that you want to share, there's a link in the show notes to text in those questions. And again, this is not therapy advice. This is not mental health treatment. If you are in an unsafe situation or have concerns, then please reach out for professional support and help. Now, we're going to talk about two different women who had what seemed on the surface different experiences. One is questioning whether she should leave her husband, and the other one had a husband who passed away, and everyone felt like he was admired and really loved him, but behind closed doors was very abusive to her. But while these situations are very different, they do share a common theme. What do you do when the person everyone else sees is different than the person you experience? So, we're going to start with that first question that was sent in. I want to read you what the listener wrote. She said, I listened to your podcast episode on emotional abuse. I had some questions. How do you start to let go of the guilt of wanting to leave? I have two daughters who love their father, and he loves them so much as well. I want to leave, but I feel so bad that I'd be tearing apart the family. I also have fear, and like something inside of me is stopping me from making the move to leave. A little backstory, I've been in this relationship for about 4 years. I got into pretty quickly after my divorce from my first husband. Similarly to the podcast, I went from one unhealthy relationship to an extremely unhealthy relationship and have kids in this extremely unhealthy relationship. He's abusive emotionally. I'm always put down, controlled in everything I do and say, but he paints a picture to others of a perfect family. But in private, he's really mean to me most of the time and put me down, and it's just not healthy. But for some reason, I can't get myself to actually make the move to leave. I've told my mom everything, so I do have a support system. She obviously wants me to leave and doesn't understand why I stay. I've gotten a closer relationship to God during the trial, and I've seen a lot of my prayers answered. But leaving and when heaven just seems silent. Any advice? Thank you for your podcast. Okay. First of all, I want to acknowledge how much courage it takes to even say those things out loud. I appreciate you giving that vulnerable detail and sending that into the show. One thing that stood out to me in this question is she keeps asking herself why she can't leave. And many women believe that if a relationship were truly unhealthy, leaving would just feel obvious, right? But emotional abuse doesn't usually create clarity. It creates confusion, self-doubt, fear, and guilt. And in fact, one of the reasons emotional abuse is so difficult to leave is because it often chips away at your confidence in your own thoughts and feelings over time. You start questioning yourself. You start wondering if you're overreacting. You start wondering if it's really as bad as it feels. And you start wondering whether you're the problem. And eventually, even when you can clearly see that something isn't healthy, making a decision feels incredibly difficult. And one thing I hear this listener questioning is guilt. She feels guilty about her daughter. She feels guilty about changing the family, about what leaving would mean for everyone involved in the situation. And I think many women assume that guilt means they're doing something wrong in this situation. But guilt and guidance are not the same thing. Sometimes guilt simply reflects how deeply you care. When you care about your children, when you care about your family, when you care about the impact your decisions will have on others, guilt's kind of part of the process. It doesn't automatically mean you're making the wrong choice, and it doesn't automatically mean you're making the wrong choice. Another thing she mentioned is fear. She said she feels like something inside of her is stopping her. And I think that's important because many women interpret fear as a sign they shouldn't move on. But fear is not always direction. Sometimes fear is just simply fear, especially after experiencing years of criticism, control, or emotional manipulation. If you've spent years being told your perceptions are wrong, your decisions are bad, or feelings don't matter, of course you're going to struggle to trust yourself. Fear doesn't necessarily mean you're supposed to stay. Sometimes it simply means you're facing something difficult. The last part of her question that really stood out to me was when she said that heaven feels silent. I think many women can relate with that. They pray, they plead, they ask God what to do, and they don't get this clear answer they hoped for. One thing I've noticed is that sometimes we expect God's answers to come in the form of this clear instruction like stay or leave, do this or don't do that. But often God's answers come kind of differently than that. Sometimes his answers come in the form of strength, support, increased awareness. Maybe they come one step at a time. What stood out to me in what this listener said is she's grown closer to God during this trial. She said she's seen prayers answered. She said she has support from her mother. I wonder if some of those things are answers too, not necessarily answers about what decision to make, but answers that are helping prepare her for what's to come next. And I think that's important to remember. I hope some of those thoughts are helpful as you're listening to that. Now, while this first question focuses on the challenge of leaving an unhealthy relationship, our second question comes from someone trying to make sense of a relationship after it has already ended. Yet both women are wrestling with a similar reality. They're carrying an experience that others may not fully see or understand. So I want to read what this other listener wrote in. She said, "My husband passed away 6 years ago. He was wonderful, caring, supportive, and kind to everyone, but me. To me, he was emotionally and verbally abusive and controlling. It's really difficult to deal with because everyone else, including my children, see him as an amazing priesthood holder, Sunday school teacher, and they see only the good because they never saw the bad. My kids did see it, and that is the example they grew up with. And for them, it was normal, how things are supposed to be. And I don't want to disparage anyone's view or opinion of my husband because the good is the experience they had with him, and that's what matters. Also, I'm struggling to move past this to forgive him and graciously let others have their memories of the good experiences. I'm working with a therapist and hope it will help. Do you have any thoughts on this?" All right, this is such a painful and complicated experience. And I think it's more common than many people realize. One thing I want to say right away is that two experiences can be true at the same time. Your husband may have been very kind to other people. He may have served faithfully. He may have genuinely impacted lives for good. And he may have also been emotionally abusive towards you. Those realities do not cancel each other out. Sometimes we feel pressure to choose a single story about someone. Either they're wonderful or they were terrible. But most of the time, people are just complicated. And emotional abuse often exists in relationships where the abusive person is viewed very positively by others. One of the hardest parts of that experience is feeling like no one else saw what you saw. It can make you question yourself. It can make you wonder if your experience was real. It can make you feel incredibly alone. But your experience does not become valid because someone else witnessed it. Your experience was real because you lived it. You don't need everyone else to agree with your story because you're allowed to trust your own reality. I also want to talk about forgiveness because I think many women carry this unnecessary pressure around this. Sometimes we unintentionally believe forgiveness means focusing only on the good or minimizing the hurt or pretending we've completely moved on. But forgiveness and honesty can coexist. You can acknowledge the good someone did, you can acknowledge the ways they blessed other people, and you can acknowledge the ways they hurt you. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Forgiveness does not require rewriting history. It does not require pretending the pain wasn't real. It simply means you're working toward releasing the burden of carrying hurt forever. And that last thing that stood out to me was her concern about her children. She wants her children to be able to keep their positive memories of their father. And I think that's really beautiful because their experience of him was different. Just as your experience matters, theirs matters too. You don't have to convince your children that he was a different person, and you don't have to deny your own experience to protect theirs. Both realities can exist at the same time. And I think about both of these questions. I keep coming back to one common theme. Both of these women are wrestling with what happens when their experience doesn't match what other people see. And I think many listeners may relate to that. Maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a parent, a sibling, a church leader. Maybe it's someone everyone else seems to love. Healing often begins when we stop arguing with ourselves about whether our experience was real, and you don't need everyone else to understand what you've lived through before you're allowed to honor it. Your experience matters, your feelings matter, and your story deserves space too. Okay. I hope that today's discussion resonated with you, and I hope you'll remember that you're not alone in navigating these complicated experiences. Sometimes simply hearing that someone else understands can be an important part of the healing process. And if you have a question you'd like me to address in the future Therapy Insights episode, I'd love to hear from you. These episodes are shaped by real life concerns and experiences of you as the listener. And your questions really can help someone else who's facing a similar struggle not feel so alone. So, thank you for joining me for this Therapy Insights episodes. I hope that if you thought of somebody during this episode that you'll share it with them and help them feel some relief and feel seen as well. So, take care and I'll see you next time.